They threw the newborn into the river because her sixth finger marked her as the devil's own, her tiny hand grasping at empty air as the current swept her toward certain death. The Apache warrior who pulled her from the water 17 years ago had no idea that saving her life would one day force an entire town to face the monster they'd created, not in her, but in themselves. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rain fell like tears from heaven that August night in 1872, drumming against the wooden roofs of Silverbrook, a small frontier settlement nestled between the rugged mountains of northern Arizona. Inside the Harper cabin, the air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and fear. Martha Harper, her face pale as moonlight, had been laboring for 14 hours straight. Her screams had long since faded into exhausted whimpers. "Push, Martha! Just one more!" urged Sarah Bennett, the settlement's midwife, her voice steady despite the tension that gripped her shoulders like iron clamps. When the baby finally emerged into the world, there was no cry, only silence. A silence so profound it seemed to swallow the very sound of the rain. Sarah wrapped the infant quickly in a clean cloth, her experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency. But as she lifted the tiny form to examine it more closely, her movements froze, her breath caught in her throat. "What is it?" Martha's voice was barely a whisper, drained of all strength. "Why isn't she crying?" The baby suddenly drew breath and let out a wail, strong, healthy, defiant. But Sarah's expression didn't soften. Instead, her eyes fixed on something that made her blood run cold. The infant's left hand, 6 fingers. Perfect, tiny, moving fingers where there should have been 5. "Oh, dear God," Sarah breathed, quickly covering the hand with the cloth. But it was too late. Thomas Harper, who had been pacing outside, burst through the door at the sound of his daughter's cry. "Let me see her," he demanded, reaching for the bundle. Sarah hesitated, her arms tightening protectively around the newborn. "Thomas, she's healthy, she's strong, she—" "Let me see my child," his voice cracked like a whip. When Sarah reluctantly pulled back the cloth, Thomas's face transformed. The joy that had been building in his eyes evaporated, replaced by something darker: horror, disgust, fear. "No," he whispered, backing away. "No, this isn't natural. This is a mark, a curse." "Thomas, please," Martha begged from the bed, trying to rise despite her weakness. "She's our daughter. She's cursed," Thomas roared, silencing the room. "Everyone knows what 6 fingers means. It's the devil's mark. Bad luck. If we keep her, she'll bring ruin to this entire settlement." The door burst open again, and Reverend Joshua Price entered, shaking rain from his black coat. Behind him came several men from the settlement: William Foster, the blacksmith, Edward Miller, who owned the general store, and Samuel Webb, whose wife had died giving birth just 2 months prior. "We heard screaming," Reverend Price said, his eyes immediately finding the bundle in Sarah's arms. "Is the child born?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Thomas grabbed the baby from Sarah's arms, and before anyone could stop him, he unwrapped the cloth fully, exposing the infant's left hand. "Look!" he cried. "Look what my wife has birthed! The devil's spawn!" Gasps filled the room. Samuel Webb made the sign of the cross. Reverend Price's face went ashen. "This child cannot stay here," the Reverend said slowly, his voice heavy with false authority. "In the old scriptures it speaks of such deformities as signs of evil. If we harbor this abomination, God's wrath will fall upon us all." "No!" Martha's scream tore through the cabin. She tried to rise, but her body betrayed her, too weak from childbirth. "She's innocent. She's just a baby." But the men were already deciding. In whispered tones, they spoke of protection, of the greater good, of superstitions passed down through generations. Thomas Harper, his face twisted with shame and fear, made no move to defend his daughter. When they carried the screaming infant out into the rain, Martha's cries echoed behind them, raw, primal, heartbroken. Sarah Bennett tried to intervene, tried to reason with them, but she was pushed aside. They walked through the mud and darkness to the river that ran swift and cold behind the settlement. The same river that gave them life would now take one away. Thomas Harper stood at the water's edge, the tiny bundle in his arms. For one moment, just one, he hesitated. The baby had stopped crying. Her dark eyes, so new to this world, looked up at him with an innocence that pierced his heart. But fear is stronger than love in weak men. He tossed her into the current. The night swallowed her cries as the river carried her away into darkness, into the unknown, into what they believed was certain death. What they didn't know was that the river flowed towards sacred lands, and not all who waited there believed in curses. The river had no mercy, and it had no malice. It simply carried what was given to it, indifferent to the weight of human cruelty. The bundle tumbled through rapids, bobbed over smooth stones, and drifted past willow branches that hung like skeletal fingers in the moonlight. Inside the waterlogged cloth, the infant's cries had weakened to soft, desperate mewls, the sound of life clinging by a thread. Miles downstream, where the river carved through a sacred canyon that the Apache people called Seku Hatso, the Great White Rock, Takoda knelt by the water's edge. He was 23 years old, lean and muscular, with hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had seen too much death for his young age. In his hands, he held a fishing spear, but his mind was elsewhere. The drought had been hard that summer. Game was scarce, and the river had dropped to levels his grandfather had never seen in his lifetime. The white settlers who kept arriving in wagon after wagon were pushing his people farther into the mountains, taking the fertile valleys, damming the streams. Takoda's tribe, a small band of Chiricahua Apache, survived by moving with the seasons, by knowing every hidden spring and secret hunting ground. But survival was getting harder. He was about to cast his spear when he heard it. A sound so faint he thought at first it was a bird. But birds didn't cry like that. Birds didn't make sounds that tugged at something deep in the human heart. Takoda stood, his spear forgotten, his head tilted as he listened. There it was again, softer now, weaker. Without thinking, he dropped the spear and ran along the riverbank, his moccasins silent on the damp earth. His eyes scanned the dark water, searching for the source of the sound. The moon had broken through the clouds, painting the river in silver light. That's when he saw it, a bundle of cloth caught on a fallen log that jutted into the current. It bobbed there, held in place by a branch, and from within came the weakest of cries. Takoda didn't hesitate. He plunged into the cold water, the current immediately trying to pull him downstream. The river was deceptively strong, fed by mountain snowmelt even in summer. His muscles strained as he fought his way to the log, water rushing past his chest, filling his mouth when he gasped for air. His fingers closed around the cloth just as it began to slip free. "I have you," he whispered in Apache, pulling the bundle against his chest. "I have you." He struggled back to shore, his legs shaking from cold and effort. On the bank he collapsed to his knees, cradling the bundle carefully. With trembling fingers he unwrapped the wet cloth. A baby, a girl, her skin pale, her lips blue, her body so cold it terrified him. But her eyes were open, and they looked at him with an intensity that stopped his breath. Takoda had seen death before. He had held his younger brother as fever took him. He had watched his mother waste away after a white man's disease swept through their camp. He knew the look of life leaving a body. This child was not ready to leave. He wrapped her quickly in his own shirt, pressing her tiny form against his bare chest for warmth. Then he ran. His camp was half a mile away, hidden in a grove of cottonwood trees near where the canyon opened into a wider valley. "Ayasha!" he shouted as he burst into the circle of teepees. "Ayasha, quickly!" His grandmother, a woman of 70 winters, with silver hair and hands that could heal or harm with equal skill, emerged from her dwelling. She took one look at Takoda's face and moved with surprising speed. "Inside," she commanded, pulling back the flap of her teepee. "Bring her to the fire." Takoda knelt by the flames, still holding the infant against his skin. Ayasha's weathered hands examined the baby with practiced efficiency, checking her breathing, her color, the temperature of her tiny limbs. "She's been in the water," Ayasha said, her voice steady, but her eyes sharp with concern. "Not long, but long enough." "Who would do such a thing?" "The white settlers, I think," Takoda replied, his jaw tight. "Only they would throw away a life so easily." Ayasha wrapped the baby in warm furs and placed heated stones nearby to drive away the cold. She prepared a mixture of herbs, yarrow and sage, and used the steam to help the infant breathe more deeply. Throughout it all, the baby's eyes remained open, watching as if determined to witness her own survival. It was only when Ayasha was satisfied that the immediate danger had passed that she noticed what Takoda had been too focused to see. The baby's left hand had slipped free from the furs, 6 perfect, tiny fingers. Ayasha's breath caught. She looked at Takoda, her eyes wide with something that wasn't fear. It was wonder. "Do you know what this means?" she asked softly. Takoda shook his head, his heart still pounding from the rescue. Ayasha smiled, a gentle expression that transformed her weathered face. "In the old stories, children born with such gifts are considered blessed. They see what others cannot. They walk between worlds." She touched the baby's hand with reverence. "The spirit sent her to us through the water. She is Nasha, born of the owl spirit, wise beyond her years." Takoda looked down at the infant in his arms. She had stopped shivering. Color was returning to her cheeks, and those eyes, those impossibly aware eyes, gazed up at him as if making a silent promise. He had pulled her from death. Now she would live. "Nasha," he repeated softly, testing the name. It felt right. It felt like destiny. The seasons turned like the great wheel of the sky, and Nasha grew strong in the arms of the Apache people. What began as an act of mercy transformed into something deeper, a bond that transcended blood and race. Takoda, who had no children of his own, became her protector. Ayasha, who had lost her daughter to white man's violence years before, became the grandmother she needed. The child thrived in ways that astonished the tribe. By her first winter, she was already showing signs of unusual awareness. Her eyes followed the movements of adults with an intensity uncommon in infants. By her second spring, she was walking earlier than most children, her small feet sure on the rocky ground of the canyon. And by her third summer, she was speaking in clear Apache, her voice like the tinkling of water over stones. But it was her left hand, that hand with 6 fingers, that truly set her apart. The elders watched as the child used that extra finger with a dexterity that seemed almost supernatural. When Ayasha taught her to weave baskets, Nasha's 6-fingered hand moved with a grace and precision that created patterns more intricate than girls twice her age could manage. When Takoda showed her how to tie knots for fishing nets, her unique hand allowed her to create configurations that held stronger and lasted longer. "She is blessed," the medicine man, Cochetta, declared one evening as the tribe gathered around the fire. He was ancient, his face a map of wrinkles, his eyes clouded with age but still sharp with wisdom. The spirits gave her this gift for a reason. Not everyone agreed. Some of the younger warriors, influenced by encounters with white settlers and their superstitions, whispered doubts. But Takoda silenced them with a look that could freeze water. "She is one of us," he would say, his voice allowing no argument. "The river brought her. The spirits chose her. That is the end of it." Nasha understood, even at her young age, that she was different. When she looked at her left hand, she didn't see a curse or an abnormality. She saw a part of herself, as natural as her dark hair or her quick laugh. The Apache had taught her to see beauty where the white world saw only defect. By the time she was 7 years old, Nasha could track deer through the forest, identify healing plants by their scent alone, and speak not only Apache, but also fragments of English she'd learned from Takoda, who had picked up the language during rare trading encounters with frontier settlements. It was during this time that the first real trouble came. A group of settlers had established a new homestead less than 5 miles from the Apache camp, closer than they'd ever dared before. Takoda and several other warriors had been monitoring them, keeping their distance but staying alert. The presence of white people so near sacred ground was a violation, but the tribe was small, their numbers diminished by years of conflict and disease. Direct confrontation would be suicide. One autumn afternoon, while Nasha was collecting berries with 2 other girls near the edge of tribal lands, they heard voices, white voices, male voices, rough and loud. The other girls froze in fear, but Nasha's mind worked quickly. She grabbed her companion's hands and pulled them toward a dense thicket of brambles, a hiding place she'd discovered weeks earlier while exploring. "Stay silent," she whispered in Apache. "Don't move, don't breathe." Through gaps in the branches, they watched as 3 white men passed by, trappers by the look of their gear. They carried rifles and spoke in harsh tones about Apache savages and how the land would be better once it was cleaned out. One of the men stopped, sniffing the air. "Smell that?" Smoke. Indians nearby. Nasha's heart hammered in her chest. Her left hand, her 6-fingered hand, clutched a sharp rock she'd instinctively picked up. If they were discovered, she would fight. Even at 7 years old, she understood that some things were worth fighting for. But the men moved on, their voices fading into the forest. When Nasha finally led her companions back to camp, she found Takoda sharpening his hunting knife outside his teepee. She told him everything she'd seen and heard, her words tumbling out in rapid Apache. Takoda's expression darkened. He knelt before her, placing his hands on her small shoulders. "You protected your friends," he said, his voice filled with pride and something else, concern. "You showed courage. But Nasha, you must understand something. Understand. The white world is dangerous for you in ways you cannot yet comprehend." "Because of my hand?" she asked, looking down at her 6 fingers. "No," Takoda said firmly. "Because of your heart. You care too much. You feel too deeply. These settlers, they throw away what they don't understand. They fear what is different. You are different in ways they will never accept, not just your hand, but your spirit." He pulled her into an embrace, his voice softening. "The river tried to take you once. I will never let anything take you again. Do you understand?" Nasha nodded against his chest. But even then, a question formed in her young mind, a question she wouldn't speak aloud for years. Where did I really come from? And does someone, somewhere, regret what they did? That night, as she lay in her bedroll with Ayasha humming old songs nearby, Nasha looked at her left hand in the firelight. She counted each finger slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In the white world, this hand had condemned her to death. In the Apache world, it made her special. She wondered which world told the truth. 10 years passed like water flowing through the canyon, sometimes gentle, sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward. Nasha blossomed into a young woman of 17, her features a striking blend that set her apart from both worlds. Her skin was fairer than most Apache, kissed by sun, but never quite matching the deep bronze of her adopted people. Her hair, however, was raven black and thick, falling past her shoulders in waves that caught the light. And her eyes, those eyes that had stared at Takoda with such intensity that first night, had become windows to a soul that held wisdom beyond her years. But it was still her left hand that drew attention. 6 fingers, each as functional and graceful as the others, moving with a dexterity that had become legendary among the tribe. She could shoot an arrow with greater accuracy than most warriors, her extra finger providing balance and control that others lacked. She wove baskets so intricate that traders from distant tribes would travel days just to acquire them. And when she worked with medicinal herbs alongside Ayasha, her precise touch could measure and mix with a perfection that saved lives. The tribe had grown smaller over the years. Disease, conflict with settlers, and the ever-encroaching presence of the US Army had reduced their numbers from over 100 to barely 40 souls. But what they lacked in size, they made up for in resilience. And Nasha had become a pillar of that resilience, a living symbol that survival sometimes meant embracing what others rejected. Takoda, now in his 30s, had watched her grow with the fierce pride of a father. Though he had never married, never had biological children, Nasha was his daughter in every way that mattered. He taught her to track, to hunt, to understand the language of wind and water. But more importantly, he taught her to be unashamed of who she was. "Your hand is not a flaw," he told her one evening as they sat overlooking the canyon. "It is proof that the universe has a plan even when humans abandon theirs." The settlement of Silverbrook had grown too, swelling to nearly 300 residents. The frontier town now boasted a proper church, a general store, a saloon, and even a small schoolhouse where children learned to read from books that taught them their people were superior, their ways righteous, their expansion across the land divinely ordained. Among those children now grown was a young man named Daniel Harper, the younger brother Nasha never knew she had. Daniel was 19, tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy hair and blue eyes that held a perpetual sadness he couldn't quite explain. He worked at his father's lumber mill, cutting trees from land that had once belonged to the Apache. Though no one in Silverbrook acknowledged that uncomfortable truth, he was known as quiet, thoughtful, different from the rowdy young men who spent their evenings drinking whiskey and boasting about how many Indians they'd like to kill. Daniel didn't remember his sister. He'd been only 2 years old when she was born and discarded. His mother, Martha, had never fully recovered from that night. She went through the motions of life, cooking, cleaning, attending church, but the light had gone out of her eyes. She never spoke of the daughter she'd lost, but sometimes Daniel caught her staring at her own hands, tears streaming silently down her face. Thomas Harper had built his wealth on guilt. The lumber mill prospered, his holdings expanded, but he drank heavily and spoke little. The Reverend praised him as a pillar of the community, but those who looked closely could see a man being eaten alive from the inside. The collision of these two worlds, Apache and settler, was inevitable. It came on a crisp October morning when Nasha ventured farther from camp than she should have, drawn by reports of a medicinal plant that grew only in one particular meadow. Ayasha needed it for a child suffering from fever, and Nasha knew exactly where to find it. She was kneeling in the tall grass, her 6-fingered hand carefully digging around the plant's roots, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Her head snapped up. A young white man sat atop a chestnut mare, staring at her with an expression of complete shock. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a cotton shirt, suspenders, and carried no visible weapon. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Daniel Harper couldn't breathe. He'd come to this meadow to escape the noise of the lumber mill, to find a moment of peace in nature. Instead, he'd found an Apache woman, a young, beautiful woman who stared at him not with fear, but with a steady, evaluating gaze that unnerved him. "I won't hurt you," he said quickly, raising his hands to show they were empty. Nasha understood English perfectly, though she rarely spoke it. She remained crouched, the plant still clutched in her left hand, her six-fingered hand. Daniel's eyes widened as he noticed it. His mouth opened, then closed. Something flickered across his face, not disgust but recognition, impossible recognition. "Your hand," he whispered, "6 fingers." Nasha stood slowly, her body tense, ready to run. "What of it?" Daniel shook his head, confused by his own reaction. "I don't know, it's just my mother. Sometimes she talks in her sleep. She speaks of fingers, of a baby with 6 fingers. The world seemed to tilt. Nasha's breath caught in her throat. The plant fell from her hand, forgotten. "Your mother?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel dismounted, taking a cautious step forward. "Martha Harper, she's not well, hasn't been for years, since before I can remember." The name meant nothing to Nasha, but the timing. 17 years ago, a baby born in Silverbrook thrown into the river, rescued by Takoda. Could it be? "Where is this town?" she asked. "Silverbrook? 5 miles west," Daniel replied. "Why?" Nasha looked at her left hand, at the 6 fingers that had defined her entire existence. Somewhere in that town, she realized, might be the answers to questions she'd carried her whole life, and standing before her might be the brother she never knew existed. The silence between them stretched like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap. Nasha's mind raced through everything Takoda had told her about her origins, how he'd found her in the river, how the white settlers had discarded her. She'd always imagined her birth family as faceless monsters, people so cruel they couldn't possibly be human. But standing before her was a young man whose eyes held kindness, whose first instinct had been to assure her he meant no harm. "I should go," Nasha said finally, bending to retrieve the medicinal plant. Her hands trembled slightly, a reaction that angered her. She was Apache. She was strong. She didn't tremble. "Wait," Daniel called out. "Please, I don't even know your name." She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run. But curiosity, that dangerous, persistent curiosity that Ayasha both praised and worried about, kept her rooted to the spot. "Nasha," she said, turning to face him again. "It means owl in my language." "I'm Daniel." He took another careful step forward, as if approaching a wild deer. "Daniel Harper. I work at my father's lumber mill, but He trailed off, seeming to realize how little any of that mattered in this moment. "This is going to sound strange, but I feel like I know you, like I've been waiting to meet you my whole life." Nasha's throat tightened. She knew that feeling. She'd felt it too, a hollow space inside her that no amount of love from Takoda or Ayasha could quite fill. The question that whispered through her dreams, who was I supposed to be? "Tell me about your mother," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "This Martha Harper. What happened 17 years ago?" Daniel's expression clouded. "I was too young to remember clearly. But I know something broke in her that year. My father too, though he hides it better, buries it in work and whiskey." He paused, his brow furrowing. "There are rumors in town. Whispers the old-timers share when they think no one's listening. About a baby born wrong. About something thrown into the river to protect the settlement from God's wrath." The words hit Nasha like physical blows. Thrown into the river to protect the settlement, as if she were a disease, a plague, something less than human. "And you believe such things?" she asked, her voice sharp as flint. "You believe a child, an innocent baby, deserved to die because of how she was born?" "No," Daniel said quickly, his face flushing. "God, no. I've never believed any of that superstitious nonsense. But my father, the Reverend, most of the town..." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "They believe in signs, in omens, in divine judgment. They see the world as good and evil with nothing in between." "And what do you see?" Nasha challenged, holding up her left hand, letting the sunlight illuminate all 6 fingers. Daniel met her gaze steadily. I see a person. I see someone who was judged before she could speak, before she could prove her worth. I see an injustice that people would rather forget than fix. Something in Nasha's chest loosened, just slightly. She lowered her hand. The fever is getting worse, she said, more to herself than to him. The child in my camp needs this medicine. She looked down at the plant, then back at Daniel. I must go. Can I see you again? The question tumbled out of Daniel's mouth before he could consider the wisdom of it. I know it's dangerous, I know our people, but I need to understand what happened, and I think you do too. Nasha should have said no, should have walked away and never looked back. Takoda would be furious if he knew she'd even spoken to a white settler, let alone contemplated meeting with one again. But the truth was, like a living thing inside her, demanding to be known. 3 days from now, she said, at dawn, this meadow, tell no one. Daniel nodded solemnly. I swear it. As Nasha melted back into the forest, Daniel remained standing in the meadow, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He didn't understand the connection he felt to this Apache woman, didn't understand why the sight of her 6-fingered hand had triggered such a profound recognition. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that his life had just changed forever. That evening, in the Harper household, Martha set dinner on the table with mechanical precision. Thomas ate in silence, as always. Daniel pushed his food around his plate, his mind miles away in a meadow where an impossible meeting had taken place. Daniel, Martha said suddenly, her voice hoarse from disuse. You look troubled. What's wrong? He wanted to tell her, wanted to describe the young woman he'd met, wanted to ask about the baby she sometimes cried for in her sleep, but the words died in his throat when he saw his father's sharp look of warning. Nothing, Mother, he lied. Just tired from work. But later that night, as he lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, Daniel Harper made a decision. Whatever secrets his family held, whatever sins had been committed in the name of righteousness, he would uncover them. And if that Apache woman, if Nasha, was somehow connected to those secrets, then perhaps together they could find something neither of them had ever truly possessed, the truth. Dawn broke over the meadow like a whispered promise, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Nasha arrived first, as she'd planned, positioning herself where she could observe the approach from Silverbrook while remaining hidden in the tree line. She told no one about this meeting, not Takoda, not Ayasha, not even her closest friend in the tribe. The weight of that secret sat heavy in her chest. She almost hoped Daniel wouldn't come. That would make everything simpler. She could return to her life, forget about the possibility of answers, continue being simply Nasha, the Apache girl with 6 fingers who'd been given a second chance at life. But when the sun crested the eastern hills, she saw him riding across the meadow, alone as promised. Daniel dismounted and waited, scanning the tree line. Nasha stepped into the open, and relief flooded his face. You came, he said. I said I would. She moved closer, studying him in the morning light. There was something in the line of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, that nagged at her, something familiar in a way she couldn't name. Did you bring what I asked? Daniel reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. My mother's journal. From 17 years ago, I found it hidden in the attic. I haven't read it all. It felt like a violation, but I thought you should see it. Nasha took the journal with trembling hands. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the feminine handwriting that filled the pages. August 14th, 1872. The baby came tonight. I labored for hours, praying for a healthy child. But when she finally entered this world, I saw immediately that something was wrong. 6 fingers on her left hand. Thomas says it's a curse. Reverend Price says it's the devil's mark. They won't let me hold her. They won't even let me name her. Nasha's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall. August 15th, 1872. They took her, my baby, my daughter. Thomas carried her to the river in the middle of the night. I tried to stop them, tried to fight, but I was too weak. Sarah Bennett held me down while they did the unforgivable. I heard her crying as they carried her away. I hear it still. I will hear it forever. That's enough, Nasha whispered, closing the journal. She thrust it back at Daniel, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. Daniel's face had gone pale. So it's true. They really did it. They murdered a baby because of... He looked at Nasha's left hand, at the 6 fingers she no longer tried to hide. His eyes widened as understanding crashed over him like a wave. Oh God, you're her. You're my sister. The word hung in the air between them. Sister. Nasha took a step back, shaking her head. No, I am Nasha. I am Apache. I am the daughter of Takoda and the granddaughter of Ayasha. Whatever I was before the river doesn't matter. But it does, Daniel insisted, his voice breaking. Don't you see? You survived. Against all odds, against nature itself, you lived. And now you're here and I'm here and we have a chance to... To what? Nasha cut him off, anger flaring hot in her chest. To be a family? To pretend that what was done to me can be undone? Your father threw me away like garbage. Your mother let it happen. Your reverend blessed it. The entire town would have celebrated my death. I know, Daniel said quietly, and I can't change any of that. But I'm not them, Nasha. I'm not my father. She wanted to hate him, wanted to channel all her rage and hurt toward this young man who represented everything that had tried to destroy her. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw only pain, a pain that mirrored her own. What do you want from me? She asked, exhausted. The truth, Daniel said. I want my mother to know you survived. I want my father to face what he did. I want the town to understand that their superstition murdered an innocent child, and that she lived anyway, despite them. And you think the truth will set us free? Nasha's laugh was bitter. Your people don't want the truth. They want their comfortable lies. Maybe, Daniel admitted, but I need to try. For you, for the baby my mother still cries for myself, because I've lived my whole life feeling like something was missing, and now I know what it was. Nasha turned away, gazing across the meadow toward the canyon where her real home lay. If Takoda finds out I've been meeting with you, he'll forbid me from leaving camp. He'll say I'm betraying the tribe. Are you? Daniel asked softly. I don't know, she confessed. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Daniel moved to stand beside her, careful not to touch, respecting the distance she needed. My mother is dying. Not physically, though her health isn't good, but inside. She's been dying since the night they took you. Maybe if she saw you, saw that you're alive and strong and everything they said you couldn't be, maybe she could finally forgive herself. She wants forgiveness? Nasha's voice was sharp. She held my fate in her hands and chose wrong. She was weak, Daniel said, and she's paid for it every day since. But you're not weak. You survived. You became someone remarkable. Don't you think that's worth something? Nasha looked at her left hand, at the 6 fingers that had marked her for death and then for greatness. I need time to think. I'll wait, Daniel promised, however long you need. As they parted ways, Nasha felt the foundations of her world shifting beneath her feet. She was no longer just the girl from the river. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone who'd been thrown away and had clawed her way back to life. The question was, what would she do with that knowledge? Nasha returned to camp with the burden of truth weighing on her shoulders like wet leather. She went through the motions, delivering the medicinal plant to Ayasha, checking on the feverish child, helping prepare the evening meal. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying every word from the journal, every expression on Daniel's face. It was Takoda who noticed first. He always did. "You're troubled," he said that evening as they sat by the fire. The rest of the camp had settled for the night, leaving them in that quiet space where truth had no choice but to surface. "I'm fine," Nasha lied, but her voice betrayed her. Takoda was silent for a long moment, his weathered face illuminated by the dancing flames. "When you were small, maybe 4 winters old, you asked me where you came from. Do you remember what I told you?" Nasha nodded. "You said I came from the river. That the spirit sent me because you needed someone to teach you how to love again after loss." "And it was true," Takoda said softly. "But you're not 4 winters old anymore. You're a woman now, and women need more than stories. They need truth." He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. "You've met someone from Silverbrook." It wasn't a question. Nasha's breath caught, but she didn't deny it. "How did you know?" "I've watched you carry questions your whole life. Questions I couldn't answer because I didn't have those answers." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "And yesterday, when you returned from gathering plants, you looked at your hand differently. Not with pride, not with acceptance, but with pain, old pain, newly remembered." Tears pricked Nasha's eyes. "His name is Daniel Harper. He's—" She struggled with the word. "He's my brother, my blood brother from before the river." Takoda's jaw tightened, but he didn't explode with anger as she'd feared. Instead, he simply asked, "And what does he want?" "For me to meet her. My birth mother, she's dying, Takoda, dying from the guilt of what she did. He thinks seeing me alive might give her peace before she goes." "And what about your peace?" Takoda asked sharply. "What about the girl who was thrown away like refuse? Does she deserve peace, or must she provide it for those who wronged her?" "I don't know," Nasha's voice cracked. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I'm angry, so angry I can barely breathe sometimes, but I'm also curious and sad and confused. I'm Apache, but I'm also something else, something I don't understand." Takoda rose and placed his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are Apache because you choose to be. Not because of blood, but because of spirit. I have never seen you as anything else, do you understand? Never." "But what if I need to know?" Nasha whispered. "What if I need to look her in the face and hear her say why? What if I need to confront the man who threw me into the river and tell him that I lived despite him?" "Then you will do it," Takoda said simply. "But not alone. Never alone." The next morning, Nasha found Ayasha grinding herbs outside her teepee. The old woman looked up, her knowing eyes seeing everything without need for words. "Sit, child," Ayasha commanded gently. Nasha sat, and suddenly everything poured out. The meetings with Daniel, the journal, the truth of her origins, her confused heart. Ayasha listened without interruption, her hands never stopping their rhythmic grinding. When Nasha finally fell silent, exhausted, the old woman spoke. "When Takoda brought you to me that night, you were blue with cold, barely breathing. I could have refused to help. You were white after all, and whites had killed my daughter, burned my village, scattered my people." She paused, her voice growing softer. "But when I looked at you, I didn't see white or Apache. I saw a baby who deserved to live. That choice, to see the child instead of the color, that changed everything." "What are you saying?" Nasha asked. "I'm saying that the hardest thing in this world is to see people as they truly are, not as we've been taught to see them. Your birth mother failed that test once. but perhaps she's earned another chance. Ayesha fixed Nasha with a penetrating stare. The question is, have you earned your peace? Or will you let their fear continue to define you? That night, Nasha couldn't sleep. She walked to the edge of the canyon, where the river, that same river that had carried her to salvation, rushed far below. She thought of the baby who'd been tossed into those waters, helpless and condemned. She thought of the girl who'd been pulled from death, given love, given a name that meant wisdom. She thought of who she'd been and who she'd become. And she realized that confronting her past wasn't about giving peace to those who'd wronged her. It was about claiming peace for herself, about looking fear in the face and saying, "You didn't break me, you made me stronger." When dawn came, Nasha knew what she had to do. She found Takoda sharpening his hunting knife and knelt before him with the formal respect reserved for important requests. "I need to go to Silverbrook," she said clearly, "but I need you to come with me." Takoda looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we go together." The journey to Silverbrook took 3 hours on horseback. Nasha rode beside Takoda in tense silence, her heart hammering against her ribs with each mile that brought them closer to the settlement. She'd dressed carefully that morning, wearing her finest Apache clothing, a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork that she'd made herself. Her 6-fingered hand had created patterns of breathtaking beauty, and she wanted them to see that, wanted them to understand what they'd tried to destroy. Takoda rode with the bearing of a warrior, his rifle visible across his saddle, not a threat, but a statement. He would protect his daughter, blood or not, against any who sought to harm her. They met Daniel at the agreed location, a grove of cottonwood trees on the outskirts of town. His face was drawn with worry. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Nasha. "Once we enter town, there's no going back. People will see you. They'll know." "Good," Nasha said firmly. "Let them see. Let them know that their curse lived." Daniel's eyes shifted to Takoda. "Sir, I should warn you. Apaches aren't welcome in Silverbrook. There's been tension. Some of the men have been talking about raids, about defending the settlement." "I go where my daughter goes," Takoda replied, his English heavily accented but clear. "They can accept or they can try to stop us. Either way, we are going." They rode into Silverbrook just as the church bells rang for noon. The main street went silent as they passed. Women gathered their children. Men reached for weapons that hung on their hips. Whispers spread like wildfire through the dusty street. "Apache! What's an Indian doing here? Someone get the sheriff." But it was when the townspeople noticed Nasha, noticed her pale skin, her features that didn't quite match Takoda's, that the whispers changed. "Is that a white girl? She's dressed like them savages. Good Lord, has she been kidnapped?" Daniel rode ahead, trying to clear a path. "Let us through. We're here peacefully. We just need to—" "Daniel Harper!" The voice boomed across the street. Thomas Harper emerged from the lumber mill, his face red with fury. "What in God's name are you doing bringing Indians into this town? Have you lost your mind?" "Father, please," Daniel said. "This is important. Just listen." But Thomas wasn't listening. His eyes had locked on Nasha, and something in her face, something familiar, made him freeze. The color drained from his cheeks. "No," he whispered, "it's not possible." Nasha dismounted slowly, her movements deliberate. She walked toward the man who'd thrown her into the river 17 years ago, and with each step, the crowd grew quieter, sensing something momentous was about to unfold. "Hello, Father," she said, the word dripping with bitter irony. She held up her left hand, letting the afternoon sun illuminate all 6 fingers. "Do you remember me? I was much smaller the last time we met." Thomas staggered backward, his hand clutching at his chest. You died. You're supposed to be dead." "Disappointed?" Nasha asked, her voice cutting like a blade. Sorry to inconvenience you, but the river had other plans, and so did the man you call Savage." She gestured to Takoda, who sat tall on his horse, watching everything with hawk-like intensity. "He pulled me from the water. He gave me life when you took it away. He loved me when you threw me into the darkness." The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. Reverend Price pushed through, his Bible clutched in his gnarled hands. "This is impossible." "That child was cursed. She couldn't have survived. And yet," Nasha said, turning to face the Reverend, "here I stand, alive, healthy, blessed by the people you call heathens, while you men of God, condemned an innocent baby to death." "We were protecting the settlement," the Reverend protested. "The signs were clear. The signs were lies," Nasha shot back. "Lies born of fear and ignorance. You want to know what my 6 fingers mean? They mean I can weave baskets that last for years. They mean I can shoot an arrow truer than any of your men. They mean I was gifted, not cursed, but you were too blind to see it." A woman's cry cut through the tension. Martha Harper appeared in the doorway of her home, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She stared at Nasha as if seeing a ghost. "My baby," Martha whispered, "my baby girl." The street held its collective breath as mother and daughter, separated by 17 years, by prejudice, by a river that had meant to kill, but instead had saved, faced each other for the first time since that terrible night. Martha Harper moved forward on trembling legs, her body frail from years of grief that had eaten her from the inside out. She reached toward Nasha with shaking hands, but stopped short of touching her, as if afraid the young woman would dissolve like morning mist. "I held you for only a moment," Martha whispered, her voice breaking. "They took you from my arms before I could even count your fingers, before I could tell you I loved you." Nasha felt her throat tighten, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of these people who had condemned her. "You let them take me." "I was weak," Martha sobbed. "I was weak and frightened, and I've lived with that shame every single day. Every night I hear your cries. Every morning I wake up knowing I failed you." "You did fail me," Nasha said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. "But someone else didn't. Someone else chose to see value where you saw only curse. Someone else pulled me from death and gave me life." She turned to Takoda, who remained mounted, watching with fierce pride. "That man is my father, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by everything that matters." Thomas Harper found his voice, though it came out strangled. "We did what we thought was right, what the Bible commanded, what cowardice demanded." Nasha cut him off. "Don't hide behind God's word when it was your own fear that guided you, your own weakness." "The girl speaks truth," said a voice from the crowd. Sarah Bennett, the midwife who delivered Nasha 17 years ago, stepped forward. Her face was lined with age and regret. "I've carried the guilt of that night ever since. I tried to stop them, but I wasn't strong enough. I should have fought harder." More voices began to rise from the crowd. A few, hesitant at first, admitting they'd always felt something was wrong about what happened. Others remained silent, their faces hard with stubborn conviction that they'd done nothing wrong. Reverend Price raised his Bible. "This is blasphemy. We cannot let this Indian-raised girl come here and question the decisions made by righteous men. She may have survived, but that doesn't mean—" "Enough!" Daniel stepped between the Reverend and his sister. "Enough lies, enough justifications. Look at her, really look at her. She's brilliant, skilled, strong. Everything you said she couldn't be, everything you were too blind to see she could become." "She's been corrupted by savages," someone shouted from the crowd. Takoda dismounted in one fluid motion, his presence commanding immediate attention. Though he spoke in accented English, every word rang clear. "You call us savage? We saved life you threw away. We gave love you denied. We saw gift where you saw curse." He stood beside Nasha, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "My daughter is proof your God does not agree with your hate." The weight of those words settled over the crowd like snow. Martha sank to her knees, her hands clasped in prayer or desperation. "Please," she begged, "please, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but can you forgive me? Can you understand that not a day has passed when I didn't regret what happened, when I didn't pray for your survival?" Nasha looked down at the woman who'd given birth to her. 17 years of questions, of wondering, of imagining this moment. And now that it was here, she found she didn't feel what she'd expected. Not hatred, not even anger anymore. Just a profound sadness for all the years lost, for the mother and daughter they could never be. "I don't forgive you," Nasha said quietly. "I can't. What was done to me was unforgivable. But," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I don't hate you either. You're just someone who made a terrible choice. A choice I've spent my whole life rising above." She turned to address the entire town, her voice gaining strength. "I came here today, not for your approval or your apologies. I came to show you that your judgment was wrong, that your fear accomplished nothing except to reveal your own limitations. I am Nasha, daughter of the Apache, and I'm exactly who I was meant to be, not despite you, but because I survived you." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, Martha nodded. It wasn't acceptance. It was resignation to a truth she'd always known but never faced. She'd lost her daughter the moment she'd let fear overrule love. Thomas turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched with the weight of a guilt he'd never truly acknowledge. Some followed him. Others remained, their expressions thoughtful, changed. Nasha looked at Daniel. "Thank you for helping me find the truth. But this is where our paths separate. You have your life here, I have mine elsewhere." Daniel nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand, but if you ever need anything—" "I won't," Nasha said gently, "but I hope you find peace with the truth. You deserve that much." She mounted her horse and, together with Dakota, rode out of Silverbrook. Behind them, a town grappled with uncomfortable truths. Ahead, the canyon waited. Home, sanctuary, the place where curses became blessings. 5 years passed, like the turning of seasons, each one bringing change to the canyonlands and to the frontier beyond. Nasha sat on the edge of the cliff overlooking the river, that same river that had carried her toward death and instead delivered her to life. Beside her, a small child with dark hair and eyes played with a basket, her tiny fingers, all 5 of them, weaving clumsily through the reeds. This was Ayasha the Younger, named for her great-grandmother who had passed peacefully 2 winters ago. Her final words, a blessing upon the girl she'd helped save so many years before. Dakota approached, his steps slower now, silver threading through his black hair. He lowered himself beside Nasha with a slight grunt. "The trader from the valley brought news from Silverbrook," he said quietly. Nasha looked at him, waiting. "Martha Harper died 3 weeks ago. Peacefully, they say, in her sleep." Nasha nodded slowly, processing this information. She felt a pang, not of grief exactly, but of something softer. Closure, perhaps. And the others? Thomas Harper lives, but barely. The drink has consumed him. Daniel has taken over the mill. They say he treats his workers fairly, white and Apache alike. He's been teaching at the schoolhouse, talking about tolerance and understanding. Dakota paused. "He tells your story, they say. The true one. Does he?" Nasha looked down at her hands, the right with 5 fingers, the left with 6. The hands that had been deemed cursed had created more beauty, healed more wounds, and held more love than those who'd condemned her could ever understand. "I hope he tells them the important part. What's that? The difference between curse and blessing is often just a matter of perspective, of love over fear, of choice over circumstance. Little Ayasha toddled over, presenting her poorly woven basket with immense pride. Nasha took it reverently, examining the crooked weaving with the seriousness it deserved. "It's beautiful," she said in Apache. "You're learning well." The child beamed and ran back to her play. Takoda watched with soft eyes. "You've taught her well," he said, "just as you've taught so many others. The young women come from 3 valleys now to learn medicine from you. The elders call you Wise Owl. Your baskets trade for more than anyone else's. You've become exactly what Ayasha knew you would be." "I became who I chose to be," Nasha corrected gently, "with help from those who loved me despite what others feared." Movement caught her eye. A lone rider approached the camp. Not unusual, as traders and messengers came regularly now. But as the figure drew closer, Nasha recognized him. Daniel Harper had aged 5 years, but his eyes held something new. Peace, perhaps, or purpose. He dismounted respectfully at the edge of camp, waiting for permission to enter. Takoda tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his knife. "It's all right," Nasha said, standing. "I'll speak with him." She walked to meet her brother, this connection to a past she'd transcended, but never quite forgotten. "I hope I'm not intruding," Daniel said. "I needed to tell you in person. Mother's last words were about you. She said, 'Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I see now what she always was, a gift, not a curse. Tell her she was right to choose the love that saw her truly.'" Nasha's throat tightened, but she held her composure. "Thank you for coming all this way to tell me." "There's more," Daniel continued. "The town, it's changing. Not all of it, not quickly. But your story, what you did by confronting us, it planted seeds. Young people question the old superstitions now. The schoolhouse teaches that differences aren't defects. It's small, but it's something." "Change often starts small," Nasha acknowledged. Daniel looked at her left hand, visible even at distance. "May I?" he asked, gesturing. She extended her hand. He took it carefully, respectfully, examining the 6 fingers that had once condemned her. "I'm teaching my students that this," he said, "is proof that nature is more creative than our fears allow us to imagine, that what we call abnormal is often simply unfamiliar. You taught me that." "I taught you nothing," Nasha said. "You simply chose to learn." They spoke for a while longer, about the settlement, about the tribe, about the careful peace that was slowly, tentatively building between their worlds. When Daniel finally mounted his horse to leave, he paused. "I'm proud to call you my sister," he said. "Even if we never meet again, I'll carry that pride forever." Nasha watched him ride away, then returned to where Takoda and little Ayasha waited. The child reached for her immediately, and Nasha lifted her, feeling the solid weight of a life fully lived, fully claimed. "Do you ever wonder," Takoda asked, "what would have happened if the river had been deeper? If the current had been stronger?" "No," Nasha said simply, "because it wasn't. Because you were there. Because love proves stronger than fear, and life more persistent than death." The sun set over the canyon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The river below continued its eternal journey, carrying with it the memory of a baby thrown away, and a woman who'd risen from those waters to prove that curses are only as powerful as we allow them to be. Nasha's story became legend among both peoples, a reminder that the greatest gifts sometimes come wrapped in the things we fear most. That a child's worth isn't measured by fingers or skin or origins, but by the love they receive and the love they give in return. And every child born with differences, in the canyon lands or in the settlements beyond, heard whispered the name of Nasha, The girl the river couldn't kill, the woman who turned a curse into a blessing. Proof that we become not what we're told to be, but what we choose to become.